Hello, today I'd like to show you how to make flying geese units from 5-inch squares. This is a method I've used in one of my patterns called Flying Geese using 5-inch squares, which is available on my website under the 5-inch charm patterns, www.gourmetquilter.com. So we're going to start out with some 5-inch squares, and today I'm using some 5-inch squares that I've cut from some men's shirting fabrics. A friend of mine had given me some pockets of some men's shirts and they were just the right size to get 5-inch squares out of. So I've got a little stack of 4 squares here that I'm going to show you with, and my background fabrics, I'm going to use white today. I've got 5-inch squares of the background fabrics as well. So to start off with, you need to trim your 5-inch squares just a little bit, and because mine have got stripes and I want the stripes going in a certain direction, up and down, I'm going to trim off 1/2 inch off one side of the 5-inch square so that they'll end up being 4.5 inches by 5 inches. So I'll take off that 1/2 inch, and now I need to cut them in half the other way. So I'll turn that around, and I'm using the markings on my board to help me line my fabrics up, and I'm going to cut that in half, so at 2.5 inches. So I've now got 2 strips of each of the squares that are 4.5 inches long and 2.5 inches wide. On my background fabric, which could be assorted fabrics, but I've chosen today to just use white, I need to cut that into half in both directions so that I'll end up with 4 2.5 inch squares from each 5-inch square. So again, using my board to help me line things up, I'll cut them that way, and I'll turn that around and line them up again, and then cut them in half the other way so that I'll end up with 2.5 inch squares. And then to pop your corners on, we're going to sew a square onto each end of a rectangle. So I would probably mark a line on the back of the square. You might find on this size that you don't need to mark it. You can see to sew a straight line from corner to corner, but I think that markings can be very helpful in keeping it straight. So I've actually done a few ahead, so you don't have to watch me drawing lots of lines that I'm sure you can manage to do by yourselves. And so what I would then do is I would take some of my background squares with the lines on them and my strips, and I'd position this square on there so that the line that I've drawn comes from the bottom corner up towards the centre. And then I'm going to take that to the sewing machine and sew that on there along that line that I've drawn. So sewing right on the line. And then I'll get the next one and feed that straight in. Same thing, from the bottom corner up towards the centre with your diagonal line. And I'm just going to run 4 of these through so that you get a good idea of what I'm doing. I just love these shirting fabrics, they're so nice. Now I'll take those out, just quickly clip them apart, and back to the rotary cutting. And now I'm going to just trim away the corner on the outside, so the smaller area. So I'm going to line my ruler. I've got a 1/4 inch marking on my ruler, which is very convenient. I'm going to lay that on the actual stitching line, and I'm going to cut 1/4 inch away from the stitching line and just trim that triangle off there. And then I'm going to take these to the iron and I'm going to press them. Now, because I've used white and that seam might show through, I'm actually going to press the seam so that it goes in towards the coloured fabric. So to do that, I'll lay down the white triangle first, and holding this up, I'll just pop the iron close to that and let that fold over as I press. And then I get a nice flat seam with no seam showing underneath the white. And now I'm going to come back with some more of these squares that I've got ready with the lines drawn on them, and I'm going to sew them on the other end of the rectangle. Same thing with the point going out to the corner up to the centre, but this time, because it's more convenient for feeding it into the machine, I'm going to start at the centre point and come out. So that will overlap at the top. So you can see they're quick and easy. Lots of things you can use Flying Geese units for. And for those of you who have lots of collections of 5-inch charm squares at home, this is a great way of using up some different fabrics. The background squares don't have to be all the same like I've got mine this time. They can be all different shades of a colour. Again, I'm just going to trim off the same as we did the other one, 1/4 of an inch away from the seam line. And these triangles, you don't need those anymore unless you're into doing miniatures. They're not really big enough to do a lot with. And then back to the iron. And again, remembering to lay the white down first. And there's a little bit of bulk at the point, but if you just take it gently, that will just press down nicely. And there we have our Flying Geese units. These will measure 2.5 inches high by 4.5 inches wide. So a finished unit when sewn into a quilt will be 2 inches by 4 inches. A very usable size to go into all sorts of blocks. As you can see here, I've got some really delicious looking flying geese. And I've got a quilt here that I've made using the pattern that I mentioned before, the Flying Geese, using 5 inches. And this is the quilt that I made from that pattern. And here I haven't got the same fabric as the background. I've used a variety of different light creamy colours for the background and the 5-inch squares cut in half for the geese. So I hope you enjoy making those units. Thank you.